The bottle in the dust asterisk. The sun was hot above the desert, and the sky was clear without a single cloud. Eli walked slowly through the sand, and his boots sank a little with every step. He was tired and thirsty, and dust covered his face and hands. Looked like a lost traveler, but he was not lost at all. He was a scientist on a secret mission, testing a device that could find strange signals in the air. He called it the star ear because it could hear sounds from the sky. He was working alone, and had been walking for hours searching for the perfect spot to test his machine. He stopped near an old rock and sat down, wiping his forehead. His backpack was heavy, but he placed it on the ground gently. He took out the star ear and placed it on the sand. The machine was small but powerful, and it started to blink with tiny lights. Eli looked at the screen and waited. The machine began to pick up a strange low sound. He listened closely and smiled. Then the signal disappeared. He stood up and looked around. The sand shifted under his feet, and something shiny caught his eye. Half buried in the sand was an old bottle. It looked strange, like it did not belong there. The glass was blue and gold, and a soft glow came from inside. Eli bent down and picked it up slowly. The bottle was warm, like it had been waiting in the sun for a long time. He wiped off the sand and held it in his hands. He laughed softly and said to himself, "This looks like something from a storybook." He shook the bottle, but nothing happened. He turned it around and looked at the strange writing on the glass. Then, just for fun, he rubbed the side of the bottle with his sleeve. Suddenly the air around him changed. The wind stopped. The sand around his feet began to swirl. A flash of golden light exploded from the bottle, and smoke filled the sky. Eli jumped back and dropped the bottle. The light grew brighter, and the smoke turned into a shape. From the middle of the smoke came a beautiful figure, a woman with glowing eyes, long dark hair, and clothes that looked like flowing stars. She floated above the ground and looked at him with a soft smile. Her voice was calm and strong as she spoke. "You have awakened me, human, and I am bound to grant you 3 wishes." Eli stared in silence, unable to speak for a moment. She looked like a dream, like something from another world. He stepped back slowly and then looked at the bottle. He said in a quiet voice, "Are you real?" She nodded, and her eyes sparkled. "Yes, I am. The last of my kind, and I have waited 1,000 years in silence. You may ask for anything, and I will grant it." Eli did not smile. He looked at her and then at the desert. He thought for a moment and then said something she had never heard before. He said, "I wish you were free." The genie blinked and her smile faded. She stood still as if time had stopped. She said slowly, "No one has ever wished that before. Do you not want gold or power or to live forever?" Eli shook his head and looked into her glowing eyes. He said, "You have been a prisoner for too long. You should be free. You should choose your own life, not just follow the orders of people like me." The genie stared at him as if trying to understand. Then her body began to shine. The chains of light that wrapped around her wrists faded away. The bottle beside them cracked and turned to dust. For the first time she touched the ground with her bare feet. She looked around and felt the wind on her skin. She took a deep breath. "I do not understand why you would use your first wish for me." Eli smiled and said, "Because I know how it feels to be alone." Wind began to blow again, and the sky above them looked strange. The machine near them started to beep. Loudly, Eli walked over and picked it up. The screen showed something he had never seen before, a signal from far beyond the stars. He looked at the genie, and she looked back with worry in her eyes. She said, "Something is coming, and it is not from this world." Eli nodded slowly. Then he looked up at the sky and said, "Maybe this was no accident. Maybe I was meant to find you." The genie looked down at her hands and whispered, "Maybe we were meant to find each other." Far above in the sky, something moved behind the clouds. Something ancient, something watching. Asterisk. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, and the air felt cooler than the day before. Eli stood at the edge of a rocky cliff, looking at the wide-open land in front of him. The strange bottle was gone, and so was the glow it once held. Behind him, the genie sat on a flat stone, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She no longer floated above the ground, and no light surrounded her body. She looked almost human now, but something in her gaze felt older than time. The sand was quiet, and only The soft wind moved across the land. Eli turned and walked back to her, his steps leaving a trail in the sand. He sat down beside her and offered a bottle of water. She took it slowly and looked at it like it was a gift from another world. She took a small sip and her eyes widened. "So this is how it feels," she said in a soft voice. "To taste something with your own will. To feel something without command." Eli smiled and leaned back on his hands. He looked up at the sky, which was starting to turn blue and gold. He asked her, "What will you do now that you are free?" She paused for a moment, then said, "I do not know. For 1,000 years I was trapped in that bottle. I answered the call of kings and thieves. I gave power to the cruel and gold to the greedy, but no one ever asked me who I was. No one ever thought I had a name." Eli looked at her with calm eyes and asked, "Then what is your name?" She looked at him, and for the first time she smiled. "My name is Zara," she said with pride in her voice. "It was the name given to me before I was taken, before the Council of Stars locked me away for my crime." Eli raised an eyebrow and asked, "What crime did you commit?" She looked away as if the past was too heavy for her mouth to speak. "I showed mercy." She said, "I helped a dying world when I was told not to. I broke a rule to save lives, and for that, they called me dangerous. They said I would change the balance of the universe." Eli sat in silence for a while, and then said, "Maybe the universe needs a little change." Zara looked at him again, and her eyes seemed softer now. She saw no fear in him, no hunger for wishes, no thirst for power. Only a quiet soul who had offered her freedom when he could have asked for anything. The device Eli had brought with him began to blink again. He stood up and checked it carefully. It was picking up a signal again, but this one was different. The waves were moving faster, and the screen showed strange symbols. Zara stood beside him and placed her hand gently on the device. She closed her eyes and whispered something in a language he could not understand. The screen turned black for a second, then showed a circle of light. Zara opened her eyes and said, "The signal is not from your world. It is old and deep, and carries a warning. Something is coming, Eli, something that follows my kind. They may have seen my release, and now they are looking for me." Eli looked at her and said, "What happens if they find you?" She said, "They will try to take me back or destroy everything around me." Eli picked up the device and placed it back into his bag. "We need to move," he said. "We cannot stay in the open." Zara nodded and followed him as he walked toward the nearby hills. They moved together in silence, the sand whispering under their steps. By the time they reached the rocks, the sun was high in the sky. They found a small cave hidden behind a wall of stone. Inside it was cool and dark, with space enough for them to rest. Zara sat down near the entrance and watched the light dance on the cave wall. Eli took out a small notebook and began to draw the signal pattern. He wanted to understand it, to see if it matched anything known from Earth. After some time, Zara spoke again. "Why are you really here, Eli? What are you looking for in this desert?" Eli stopped writing and looked at her. "I have a sickness," he said. "My body is breaking down. The doctors say I do not have much time, so I came here to finish my last project, to leave behind something bigger than myself. Maybe a way for humans to find other voices in the universe." Zara was silent for a while, then said, "I can feel your pain. Even without my full powers, I can sense your body fighting." Eli looked down and said, "I did not want to use a wish for healing. It felt wrong, like cheating the end. But now I wonder if it still matters." Zara placed her hand on his shoulder. Her touch was warm and steady. "You gave me freedom," she said. "Now let me give you something in return. Not a wish, but a choice." Outside the cave, the wind grew stronger, and far above in the blue sky, a dark shape moved without sound. The sky above the cave turned a deep silver as the day moved toward evening, and a strange silence covered the land. Zara stood near the entrance of the cave, her eyes scanning the sky like she was searching for something she could not name. Her long dark hair moved slowly with the wind, and her face showed no fear, only focus. Inside the cave, Eli sat on a flat stone with his notebook open and the star ear device resting beside him, still blinking with soft green light. He was trying to decode the signal that had appeared again earlier that day, and each symbol seemed to pull him deeper into thought. The symbols did not match anything from Earth, and they looked more like a language made of stars and sound than letters and numbers. Eli looked up at Zara and said, the signal is repeating every 12 minutes, but the message is not complete. It feels like a countdown, or maybe a door waiting to open. Zara stepped into the cave and sat across from him, her eyes never leaving his face. You are not just a man with a machine, she said slowly. You have seen these signs before. Eli nodded and took a deep breath. 3 years ago, I was working on a government project in the Arctic. We found something buried in the ice, not a ship, not a creature. It was a structure. It looked like a gate, and it hummed with the same kind of energy your bottle gave off. Zara leaned closer and asked, what did you do with it? We studied it day and night, Eli said, and one night I touched it without gloves. That was the first time I heard the signal. It entered my head, and I could see stars I had never learned about. I saw shapes moving through space like rivers of light, and every night after that, I dreamed of the desert, not this one, but a desert filled with towers and machines buried in sand. Zara sat in silence, her face slowly changing as he spoke. What you touched was not a gate, she said with care. It was a memory, a piece of our past left behind as a warning. You were not supposed to find it, but now that you have, they will come. Eli looked at her with calm eyes and asked, who are they? Zara stood and walked toward the back of the cave, her voice soft but strong. The Council of Silence. They are not rulers, they are watchers. Long ago, when our kind began to help younger worlds, they made a rule that nothing could be given for free. Every gift had to have balance, every action had to have weight. I broke that rule to save a world like yours, and for that they locked me in the bottle. Eli stood and followed her, his voice quiet but steady. So the signal is from them. They are coming for you. Zara turned around and said, they are coming for both of us, because now your mind holds their secret, and they will not let it spread outside. The wind howled, and the sand began to rise like a soft storm. Eli looked outside and saw the sky flashing with colors he had never seen before. Not lightning, not fire, but something in between. Zara walked out of the cave and raised her hands. The air around her shimmered like glass, and she whispered words that made the wind stop. She turned to Eli and said, we have only one choice. We must reach the source of the signal before they arrive. If we can open it fully, we may find the truth, and maybe a way to stop them. Eli picked up the star ear and placed it in his bag, then grabbed his notebook. Where is it? He asked. Zara closed her eyes and pointed toward the west. There's a place where the sand meets stone, and the stars fall in circles. That is where the first signal was born. They walked together through the rising wind. The desert was wide and empty, but the path felt alive. With every step, the ground changed color from gold to red, to dark silver. Above them, the sky turned black without warning, and stars began to blink like eyes. Zara stopped and placed her hand on Eli's chest. She looked at him and said, your time is short. Even with my power, I can only slow the pain. But the truth may hold something, even I cannot see. Eli smiled and said, I did not come here to live forever. I came to finish what I started. As they reached a cliff made of smooth black stone, Zara raised her hand again. The wind pulled back and the ground below opened with a soft hum. Stairs appeared, made of light and sound, leading deep below the desert floor. Zara looked at Eli and said, this is not just a place. It is a memory left behind by those who still watch the stars. Are you ready to walk into the past? Eli took her hand, and together they stepped into the light. Below them, something ancient began to wake, something that had waited longer than any clock could count. Asterisk. The stairs of light led Eli and Zara deeper into the earth, where the air felt thick like old dreams waiting to be remembered. Each step echoed without sound, as if the stone itself had no memory of footsteps for 1,000 years. The walls around them shimmered with a faint glow, and strange symbols pulsed like heartbeats. Trapped inside rock, Zara walked ahead, her hand raised as if guiding invisible threads, and her voice spoke in soft tones too ancient for human ears. Eli followed close behind, feeling the weight of the air press on his chest with every breath. But he did not stop. He felt like this place knew him, or had been calling him before he ever arrived in the desert. The light ahead grew stronger until the tunnel opened into a wide chamber that felt more like a cathedral than a cave. Above them, the ceiling curved like the inside of a star, and in the center stood a tall black structure, shaped like a spiral tower made from crystal and fire. Zara walked to it slowly, her fingers tracing the air just above the surface, as if touching invisible memories. "This is the signal heart," she said in a voice filled with awe and sorrow. "It is the first memory core left behind by the Watchers before they turned cold." Ele stepped closer and felt a warmth rise through his skin like light passing through his bones. He placed his hand on the tower, and the chamber shifted, as if waking from sleep. Images began to appear in the air around them, like silent echoes. Cities floating in the sky, worlds spinning too fast for time to catch, voices without mouths speaking in waves of color and rhythm. Zara closed her eyes and whispered, "The signal speaks through you now. It will show you what it showed me long ago." Eli stood still as the tower pulsed beneath his palm. He saw the truth behind his visions. He saw Zara as she once was, not bound to a bottle but standing proud among stars. He saw her choice to give light to a dying planet that begged for help, to break a sacred rule and awaken hope where there was only silence. And then he saw the Watchers, tall, faceless beings, made of shadows and code. They looked at Zara and saw danger, not kindness. They took her voice and locked her inside the bottle. They erased her from their records, but not from time. Eli stepped back, and the images faded. He looked at Zara and said, "You gave them life, and they gave you chains." She nodded and said, "My freedom came at a cost, but your wish unlocked something even deeper. It did not just set me free, it awakened the old paths, and now the Watchers will come to close them forever." As if summoned by her words, the ground above shook, and the air changed. The light inside the chamber dimmed, and a cold wind swept through the stone. Zara turned to the entrance, and her eyes narrowed. "They are here," she said, "and their silence is louder." Then thunder, soundless burst of pressure cracked through the chamber, as three tall figures appeared in the doorway. They were not made of flesh or metal, but something between their bodies shifted like liquid glass, and their eyes glowed with pale fire. They moved without walking and spoke without speaking. Their message filled the room like smoke. "You have broken the seal. You have touched the truth. This memory must be erased. This voice must be silenced." Zara stepped forward, her body glowing with soft golden light. "You buried me in darkness," she said, "and called it justice. You feared my gift and called it danger. But now I am free, and I will not run." The Watchers raised their hands, and the chamber began to shake. Eli stood beside Zara, his hand holding the star ear as if it could shield them from what was coming. Suddenly the device blinked red and emitted a high-pitched sound that made the Watchers pause. Eli looked at the screen and saw something he did not expect. Another signal was coming from above, not from space, but from the desert surface. Someone or something was answering the call. Zara turned to Eli and said, "Your machine opened a door, not just in memory, but in space. You have called another voice, and now we must find it before the Watchers destroy it." The chamber began to collapse as the Watchers moved forward. Zara grabbed Eli's arm and raised her hand toward the ceiling. A burst of energy lifted them through the stone like light moving through water. They rose back into the desert just as the sun touched the horizon. The sky burned orange and silver, and above them a strange shape moved across the clouds. It was not a ship, not a star, not a bird. It was a message written in form, a new signal, a new voice, not human, not Watcher, but something else. Era looked up and her eyes filled with wonder and fear. "They are not alone," she whispered, "and neither are we." The sky held its breath as the strange shape moved silently above the desert, casting a long shadow across the sand below. Zara stood still with her hands lowered and her eyes locked on the object that had answered the signal. Eli stepped forward, slowly, his heart pounding not from fear, but from something older and deeper than he could name. The air around them shimmered like glass, and time felt slower, like the world itself was waiting for something to happen. The object began to descend. With no sound, no fire, no smoke, it moved like a thought drifting down through layers of memory. As it touched the ground, it changed shape, becoming smaller, smoother, brighter. Then it opened like a flower made of light, and from inside a figure stepped out. The figure was not human, but not a watcher either. Its body was made of soft silver lines and glowing blue skin. Its eyes held stars within them, and its voice came as a warm current in the mind, not through the ears. Zara looked at the figure and whispered in a voice only Eli could hear, "This is not a threat, this is a witness." The figure turned to her and bowed with respect and said, "The memory speaks again, and so I return. You are not forgotten, Zara of the bound light. You are known. And your crime was never a crime to us." Zara took a slow step forward and said, "Why now? Why reveal yourself after all this time?" The figure raised its hand, and the air around them filled with images. Eli saw a world covered in silver trees and floating rivers. He saw towers that touched clouds and people made of light and song. He saw Zara standing at the center of that world, not as a genie, not as a prisoner, but as a guide. She was teaching them, healing them, sharing stories of forgotten stars. Then came the day of silence, the day the Watchers appeared and warned that her gift would twist the balance. They accused her of breaking the code of distance. They said no voice should cross the great walls of growth before its time. But the people she helped did not suffer. They rose, they learned, they survived. Figure turned to Eli and said, "She is not a myth, not a servant, not a creature of magic. She is a bridge. She carries the language of lost skies. She is one of us who chose kindness." Before command, Zara looked at Eli and said, "Now you know I am not a spirit, not a legend from lamps and stories. I am from the stars, and I was punished for hope." Eli stepped closer to her and took her hand. He said, "I never believed in destiny, but maybe we were supposed to meet. Maybe your voice was waiting for someone to listen." The ground beneath them rumbled again as the Watchers began to rise from the broken cave behind them. Their shapes twisted and flickered as they moved through the air like cracks in the sky. They saw the silver figure and spoke with force, "You are not part of this. Leave now or fall with the traitor." Silver figure stood firm, and its voice grew louder, not in sound, but in presence. "You no longer hold truth. You only hold control. You silence gifts and call it balance. You erase voices and call it peace. Your age is ending, and your fear cannot stop what has begun." Eli raised the star ear again, and the device glowed brighter than before. The signals were merging, the signal from the Watchers, the signal from the Silver Witness, the signal from deep within him. Zara placed her hand on the device, and the light turned gold. She looked at the Watchers and said, "I will not run, and I will not fight. I will show them what you tried to hide. The truth will walk free." She turned to Eli and said, "Now use your second wish. Wish not for power or safety. Wish for knowledge. Wish to know me fully. Only then can the truth rise." Eli looked at her eyes and nodded. "I wish to know who you truly are." The moment he spoke the wish, the device released a pulse that covered the desert. Time stopped. The stars froze. The Watchers paused, and a wave of memory opened like the sky had been split. Eli saw her as a child of light raised among stars without war. He saw her learn languages of flame and rivers and silence. He saw her first journey to a broken planet, and how she gave warmth to dying children. He saw her fall in love with the idea that no one was too small to matter. He saw her trial, her chains, her prison, and her endless waiting. Then the memory faded and time returned. Eli stood still, tears on his face, and said, "They feared you because they could not understand you." Zara said, "They feared me because I gave without asking what I would get, and now I give again." She turned to the Watchers and said, "I choose humanity. I choose Eli, and I choose freedom." The Watchers screamed without sound and vanished into light. The desert stood quiet again. The witness nodded once and faded into the sky. Zara stood tall, no longer a genie, no longer a prisoner, only Zara *. The desert now stood still, as if the sky itself had taken a breath and decided not to let it go. The wind that once danced across the sand now waited in silence as Eli and Zara stood at the center of a new world that had no rules, no chains, and no Watchers, the star ear lay quiet in the sand as if resting after a storm, and the golden light around it began to fade gently into the warm glow of morning. Zara looked at her hands no longer bound by magic or memory, and felt something she had forgotten across centuries of silence. She felt real. She felt present. She felt human. Ely stepped forward and picked up the device, wiping dust from its screen and checking the final signal logs. The patterns were stable, and the strange frequency from the sky had merged fully with the pulse from the memory core below. He turned to Zara and said, "The Watchers are gone, but that does not mean the story is finished. They were guardians of silence, and now that the silence is broken, others may come, some with questions, some with fear, some with fire." Zara nodded slowly and said, "Truth is never quiet for long, and once a voice rises, more begin to follow. That is how stories are born. That is how worlds begin to change." Eli looked at her face and for a moment saw not a being from the stars, but someone like him. Someone tired, someone hopeful, someone who carried weight without asking why. He said, "I have one wish left, and I do not want to waste it." Zara stepped closer and said, "Wishes are not magic. They are choices shaped by will and voice and heart. They are not given, they are made. So ask not for what you think you want, ask for what must be known." Ely sat on a smooth rock and opened his notebook, flipping through pages filled with symbols and sketches and thoughts from long nights under strange skies. He said, "I came to this desert thinking I was alone and dying. Now I see I was only waiting to hear something that felt true, waiting to see something that felt real." Zara sat beside him, her shoulder touching his gently as if to say, "I am still here, and I will not fade." Eli looked at the sky, now painted in soft orange and gold, and said, "I want my second wish to have weight. I want it to mean more than healing, more than escape." He turned to her and spoke slowly, each word carrying the gravity of a lifetime. "I wish to know what I must become, so your truth does not fade." Zara placed her hand on his forehead, and the world around them shifted again, not with light, not with sound, but with presence. Suddenly, Eli stood in a space that had no sky, no ground, no shape. He saw himself, but not as one man. He saw versions of himself across timelines, across choices, across futures not yet born. In one he was a teacher sharing the memory of stars. In another he was a traveler walking unknown worlds with only a notebook in hand. In one he died young, but left behind a voice that moved others to search for more. Zara's voice filled the space without sound. "To carry my truth is to live beyond yourself. It is to ask questions without fear, and to speak even when no one listens. It is to believe that knowledge is light, and light is never small." Eli opened his eyes, and the desert returned around him. He felt the weight of the vision not as a burden, but as a path. Zara looked at him and said, "The wish is done. Now you must decide what to do with it." Eli stood and placed the notebook back in his bag. He looked at the star ear, then at the cave where everything began. "I will go back," he said, "not to hide, but to share. The world is not ready for you, but it is ready for something more, a question, a voice, a signal." Zara smiled and said, "Then let this be our second wish fulfilled. Not healing, not escape, but a seed planted in minds that dare to dream far." In the sky a faint glow moved across the clouds. Not a watcher, not a witness, but something knew the silence had ended. The sun touched the edge of the desert as golden light spread across the land like a blanket woven from fire and memory. Eli stood beside Zara on the same cliff where it all began, where silence first broke, and the stars chose to speak. The wind moved softly across the sand, carrying no voice, no song, only the gentle reminder that time still moved even in places where it once seemed frozen. Zara watched the horizon with calm eyes that now held stories beyond human history, stories shaped in light, silence, and rebellion. They had returned to the surface, not to run, not to hide, but to witness the closing of one chapter and the rise of another below them. The cave had sealed itself again, not with force, not with magic, but with peace. Its secrets now lived within Eli, and its voice no longer needed stone walls to echo through the world. Eli turned toward Zara and said, "The world will not understand what we found, not yet, not fully. Zara placed a hand on his chest and said, understanding is not always the beginning, sometimes it is the reward at the end. Lai took a deep breath and felt the warmth in his lungs, not heavy, not painful, just present, just alive. The sickness that once wrapped his bones in fear now felt distant like a shadow. Fading at noon, he looked into her eyes and whispered, you gave me time when I gave you freedom. Zara smiled and said, you gave me more than freedom, you gave me a future with choice. The star ear rested in Eli's hand, now silent, now still yet full of potential. He had recorded every pulse, every signal, every whisper of memory that had passed through the desert air. It was no longer just a machine, it was a key to questions that had no names yet. Zara looked at the device and said, you are now the signal, you are now the path. You carry a voice that cannot be silenced unless you choose to forget. Eli sat on the warm rock and opened his notebook. He drew a symbol, one that came from the memory tower, one that appeared in every timeline he had seen. It looked like a star, but not a star. It looked like a seed, but not a seed. It looked like a promise. He said, when I go back, I will tell them not everything, but enough. Enough to stir wonder, enough to shake silence, enough to start anew. Kind of listening, Zara sat beside him, her legs crossed and her hands resting on her knees. She said, some will doubt, some will laugh, some will fear, but some will listen, and that is how truth begins. The sky above began to shift, not in color, not in form, but in presence. A quiet hum filled the air, like the deep breath of the universe itself. Zara looked up and whispered, it is time. Eli stood and asked, what is coming? Zara said, the end of our moment and the beginning of your choice. A circle of light appeared in the sky, not bright, not blinding, just open. From within the circle came shapes made of light and motion, forms not solid, not ghostly, but something in between. Zara stepped forward and said, they are not watchers, they are not witnesses, they are the guardians of balance. They do not judge, they do not rule, they only guide those who make the final step. One of the light beings moved closer, and its voice entered both minds with clarity and warmth. You have fulfilled 2 wishes. One for freedom, one for truth. Now only one remains. Eli looked at Zara, and then at the light. He said, I have no desire for gold or power or immortality. I have no hunger for fame or victory. I only have one question. Can she live again, not as a memory, not as a myth, but as a being with future breath and choice? The light paused and the air grew still. Zara turned to Eli, her face calm, but her eyes shining. You would use your final wish for me? Eli nodded and said, you were never a tool, never a weapon, never a wish. You were always a voice waiting for someone to listen. You gave me more than time, you gave me meaning. And I will give you the one thing no bottle ever held, a tomorrow. The light being spoke again. Then the wish is granted, not by force, not by law, but by harmony. Zara's form began to glow from within. Her body shifted, not into light, not into shadow, but into something entirely new. Her skin breathed, her eyes blinked, her feet touched the earth with weight. She was not genie, not alien, not prisoner. She was Zara, reborn not through magic, but through love and truth. Eli reached out and took her hand. It felt warm, steady, real. The star ear in his pocket pulsed once, then fell silent. They looked at the sky where the circle slowly faded. No more watchers, no more witnesses, only the world ahead. Hand in hand they walked across the sand, leaving 2 sets of footprints behind. Each step a story, each breath a beginning. The desert did not whisper, the sky did not sing, but somewhere beyond stars, a new signal had begun.